Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Yes, it's you, Evie, and you totally deserve to live in the biggest castle with everything life can offer. Physically, Evie is a beautiful and charming young woman of adolescent age. In Isle of the Lost, Evie is described as being the fairest of them all, with dark blue hair, dark brown eyes, and rosy lips. We know that villains have powers and their kids inherit their abilities to continue with the legacy of creating havoc, so Evie must have inherited her mom's powers, but why didn't she use them? Welcome to Riveted, and after watching this video, you'll understand why Evie didn't have powers in Descendants 3. Before we get into Evie, let's look at a bit of background about her mom, the Evil Queen, since that's where Evie is supposed to inherit her powers. The Evil Queen is the main antagonist of Disney's films Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and the first Disney animated features canon villain. I know we are all familiar with the story of Snow White, who was the only one fairer than the Queen. In an attempt to get rid of the competition, the Evil Queen turns herself into an older woman and poisons the apples she gives to Snow White. The Evil Queen has always been known as Wicked Queen or only Queen. Not much is said about her real name. However, her name was given as Queen Grimhilde in some old publicity material in comics. But the Walt Disney Company did not acknowledge it as canon until in Sophia, the first episode, in Cedric We Trust. In the Descendants franchise, she's only known as the Evil Queen. Notably, the Queen was the first character to ever speak in an animated feature film. In the original story, the Evil Queen is forced to dance to her death in red-hot iron shoes on her feet as a guest at Snow White's wedding. Disney eliminated the gruesome aspect to make Snow White seem like a nice girl. The film's version of the Queen character uses her dark magic powers to actually transform herself into an older woman instead of just taking a disguise like in the Grimm story. In some versions, she casts a spell to transform into an old hag, and in other versions, she magically transforms herself into an old witch. So we've already established that the Evil Queen had magical powers, and she could definitely cast spells which are also magical. Well, we've never known Evie's dad, but even if he was human with no powers, Evie must have inherited at least some of her mom's abilities. In the Descendants franchise, we barely get to learn about the other characters. The movies are mainly focused on Mal. But here's also a bit of background on Evie from the books, which you will completely love. Evie is castle-schooled in a castle far across the forest by her own mother, Evil Queen, because they both were banished and cursed by Maleficent after her daughter Mal was not invited to Evie's 6th birthday party. Wow, it looks like Maleficent and her daughter Mal have always been super petty. When Evie becomes a teenager, she finally leaves the castle to attend an evil school named Dragon Hall, where she meets her first friend, Carlos. Well, that explains why Carlos and Evie have always had a lot of chemistry since the franchise first aired. Descendants mainly portray the Isle of the Lost as a poverty-stricken area, but they actually had a school where villains learn from their parents' mistakes. In Dragon Hall, Evie becomes Mal's target for an ultimate scheme project and gets locked inside Cruella de Vil's fur closet, which is full of bear traps, and she barely survives the ordeal. After meeting up with Carlos again, she helps Carlos on his invention about the machine that would pick up TV and radio signals from outside the dome. But it results in making a hole in the dome for a whole minute. That brings us to the beginning of the Descendants franchise, where the villain parents send the Core Four to Auradon to get the fairy godmother's wand. In the books, Evie is forced to join Mal on recovering Maleficent's staff, which had gained back the magic from Carlos's machine. Once inside Maleficent's fortress, Evie is almost cursed to go to sleep for 1,000 years, but Mal saves her by getting Maleficent's staff back. Afterward, Mal makes amends with Evie, and the two of them become friends, and the rest is history. As seen in Spirit Day, Evie could cast a spell, although it was alongside Mal. Evie herself mentions in the novels that she is a witch. She even memorized the spells in her mother's spell book. Clearly, in the books and the animated series, she has magic powers, but in Descendants, Evie doesn't use the powers. After Descendants 2, Sophia Carson hoped that Disney's Descendants would let her use the powers. Her theory was she would probably go under a spell and poison apples or explore her evil side in other ways. We get you, Carson. We also hoped that the movie would give us more storyline about the character, Evie. But sadly, we didn't get much. And there are a couple of reasons why Evie didn't have powers in Descendants 3. Number 1, she wanted to stay in Auradon. When the VKs were told they would be going to Auradon to steal the wand, Evie was the most excited. In the beginning, she only wanted to meet a prince, and she knew she'd find plenty of princes in Auradon. Well, it didn't turn out as she expected because Audrey told her that she wasn't a real princess. Looking for the perfect prince was more difficult than she thought, but through her adventures in Auradon, Evie learned that the true meaning of beauty and that a perfect prince isn't everything. Unlike most of the villain kids, she's charming to the point that she's able to make the sourest villains smile with her laughter. Evie loved staying in Auradon, and she knew that using magic would compromise her stay, so she avoided it at all costs in Descendants 3. Number 2, she was never trained on how to use magic. If there's one thing we've learned in the Disney movies is that magic can be very clumsy without the proper training. Maleficent knew this perfectly well and started training her daughter Mal on how to use magic from a young age. The evil queen, on the other hand, concentrated on training her daughter on how to be attractive and marry a prince. As a result, Evie grew up without magical interest, and she only cared about physical beauty and etiquette. 3. No mirror, no magic. In Descendants 1, Evil Queen gives Evie what was left of her magic mirror that was put in a hand mirror, which would only help her to find things. She finds out where the wand is displayed, which leads them to a museum that contained many items about their parents' stories. While in the chemistry class, she cheats by finding the answer to the question by asking the mirror when the chemistry teacher wasn't looking. Evie eventually decided to give up the mirror because she realized that it would ruin her life. Since it was one of the only things linking her to magic, without the magic mirror, Evie was rendered powerless. 4. Mal was the reason she didn't have powers. The real reason Evie didn't have powers in Descendants 3 is because of Mal. And it's not just Evie we're worried about. At least Evie got a taste of the magic, but Jay and Carlos had no powers. Well, for Carlos, it may be a bit understandable because his mother never had a history of possessing magical powers. Jay, on the other hand, is the son to one of the most powerful sorcerers in the Disney-verse. He must have inherited a thing or two from his dad. Apparently, Descendants wanted to portray Mal as the most powerful villain kid, and to do that, they had to strip the other VK's powers. She is the only one who was lucky to have two parents, and her parents were also among the most powerful villains ever. Giving Evie powers would mean they would have to share the glory of being powerful. Disney preferred to have Mal combine forces with Uma rather than Evie, her faithful friend who always had her back. True fans of Disney characters know that the Evil Queen's trademark color is purple, but Evie's color is blue. Disney couldn't also risk having two VKs with the same color, so they gave Mal the purple trademark and Evie had to stick with blue. Evie may not have been able to use magic in Descendants 3, but she still had some of the coolest powers which didn't involve magic. Fashion design. Fashion design is a trademark of Evie, and whatever she could make with her hands has always been beautiful. Growing up with a big desire to be the fairest of them all, Evie always looks forward to wearing the best outfits, and she is never disappointed. Later on, she uses this ability to design clothes for her friends, especially Mal. In Descendants 2, she started her own clothing brand under the name Evie's Four Hearts, and she has the one fashion item which sets her apart from the rest. Evie never leaves home without her crown. Makeup. In the Descendants franchise and other adaptations, Evie is a professional makeup artist. She claimed that her mother taught her to apply blush before she could talk. We also saw how passionate she was about makeup, and the one person who enjoyed this skill was Mal. Super intelligence. Evie specializes in chemistry, and her intelligence is evident after giving up the magic mirror. After getting a B+ in the chemistry test, Evie developed a devotion for chemistry and science, and she was shown to be quite familiar with the subject. This proves that she was very capable of mixing potions, since potions are basically chemistry. If Descendants had allowed her to mix more potions, there's no telling how resourceful she would have been in Descendants 3. They wouldn't even have needed the Enchanted Lake. Friendship and loyalty. Evie was always there for her friends, and she did her best to make sure they were happy and comfortable. Her caring, selfless, and loving nature quickly made her a fan favorite, and many fans always looked forward to seeing her in the franchise. Well, fans reacted differently to Evie not having powers, but many were definitely disappointed. One said, "I was surprised they let Uma showcase her powers since they straight ignored Evie's powers, too busy trying to sell Mal as the most powerful being in the land." Another said, "Evie never wanted to use magic, Evie just wanted to make clothes and love Doug, and have a castle of her own. She always wanted to be an Auradon girl, so she never needed magic." Do you think it was unfair for Descendants to strip Evie of her powers? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. This has been Riveted, and we publish amazing videos daily. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date on the latest videos.